This is the image they said we would never see. An American-born auto giant, the company that put the world on wheels, pouring billions of dollars into a foreign country while its own factories sit underutilized. As of 10 a.m. Eastern Time this morning, Thursday, February 27th, 2026, Ford Motor Company has confirmed a massive $7 billion expansion of its Canadian manufacturing operations, anchored by the $3 billion transformation of the Oakville Assembly Complex in Ontario into a next-generation Super Duty production hub, with additional capital flowing into Windsor Engine manufacturing, EV battery infrastructure, and advanced stamping operations across the province. For the first time in the modern history of American industry, one of Detroit's big three is building its future north of the border while American trade policy makes American soil too expensive to operate on. This is not a hypothetical. This is not a press release buried in a quarterly earnings report. This is happening in real time. Ford Motor Company, the corporation Henry Ford built in Dearborn, Michigan in 1903, the company that invented the assembly line, the manufacturer that armed the arsenal of democracy in 2 world wars, has concluded that the rational financial decision is to expand production capacity in Canada rather than the United States. We are talking about 1,800 direct manufacturing jobs at Oakville alone. We are talking about 150 additional jobs at the Windsor Engine Complex building V8 engines. We are talking about 100,000 additional Super Duty trucks rolling off Canadian lines annually. And we are talking about billions more in EV and battery investment that was originally destined for American workers. Sources inside Ford's executive suite in Dearborn tell us the decision was not ideological, it was arithmetic. Under the current tariff regime, Ford paid $2 billion in tariff costs in 2025 alone, $900 million more than projected, and expects to absorb roughly the same amount again in 2026. The cumulative tariff impact across the big three, Ford, GM, and Stellantis, now exceeds $11.7 billion as of mid-2025. The math is brutal, and it all points in one direction: north. In this special report, we are going to break down exactly how Trump's tariff wall created a $7 billion escape hatch into Canada. We are going to explain why the auto industry is fleeing the very country that claims to be protecting it. We are going to reveal what sources inside the White House and on Capitol Hill are saying, and we are going to answer the question that nobody in Washington wants to ask out loud. What happens when Made in America becomes too expensive for American companies? Buckle up. The assembly lines are moving, and they are not moving in our direction. To understand why Ford is expanding into Canada, you have to understand the financial plumbing that broke over 13 months of trade war. Remember April 3rd, 2025. President Trump imposed a 25% tariff on all vehicles imported from Canada and Mexico. The stated goal was to force automakers to build everything inside the United States. The reality has been catastrophic. Ford's CEO Jim Farley told investors the tariffs represented an existential challenge to the company's North American operations. He was not exaggerating. Ford's own financial disclosures confirmed $2 billion in tariff costs in 2025, and the company's tariff relief expectations were shattered when a program announced in October turned out not to be retroactive to May as promised, adding $900 million to the bill overnight. Here is what you need to understand about how modern auto manufacturing actually works, because this is the key to understanding why the tariffs backfired so spectacularly. A Ford Super Duty truck is not built in one location. The V8 engine is manufactured in Windsor, Ontario. Transmission components cross the border to Sharonville, Ohio. Axles are built at Sterling Axle Plant in Michigan. Stamped body panels flow between facilities in multiple states and provinces. A single vehicle contains roughly 30,000 individual parts sourced from suppliers across 14 countries. Under the old USMCA rules, these parts moved freely across the border like blood through a circulatory system. Trump's tariffs introduce blood clots at every crossing. Every time a component crosses from Canada to the United States, it gets taxed. The cumulative tariff burden on a single truck now adds thousands of dollars to the production cost. So Ford did what any rational corporation would do. They ran the numbers. According to industry analysts at Auto Forecast Solutions, Ford modeled the cost structure across its entire North American footprint. The Oakville Assembly Complex, sitting on 487 acres outside Toronto, was available after Ford canceled plans to build electric SUVs there amid slowing EV demand. The Canadian federal government and Ontario each committed $295 million in subsidies. Unifor, the Canadian Auto Workers Union, negotiated favorable terms. Ontario offers cheap hydroelectric power that cuts manufacturing energy costs by up to 18% compared to coal-dependent American grids. Canada has active free trade agreements with the European Union through CETA, with Japan and the Pacific Rim through CPTPP, and with dozens of other nations. A truck built in Oakville can be exported tariff-free to 51 countries. A truck built in Ohio faces tariff walls everywhere except the domestic market. But here is the catch. This is not just about Ford making trucks in Canada for export markets. The Oakville expansion is designed as a fully flexible plant capable of producing gasoline, diesel, hybrid, and eventually extended-range electric versions of the Super Duty. Ford is not just moving production. Ford is building the future of its most profitable product line on Canadian soil. The Super Duty franchise is the backbone of Ford Pro, the company's commercial division, which generated $7.2 billion in earnings before interest and taxes in 2023 alone. It is one of the most profitable vehicle lines in the history of the automobile industry, and its next generation is being born in Ontario, not Ohio. This is where the situation escalates from corporate strategy to national crisis. Ford is not alone. The cascade has already begun. Honda announced a $15 billion EV investment in Ontario, building 4 new plants. Toyota operates 3 major plants in Ontario and has explicitly stated it has no plans to leave Canada, with its Director of Corporate Affairs calling tariffs unsustainable and saying that saner heads will prevail. General Motors paid $3.1 billion in tariff costs in 2025 and expects $4 billion in 2026. Stellantis took a $2.7 billion tariff hit in the first half of 2025. The cumulative damage across the industry is staggering. According to the Digital Dealer Tariff Tracker, the total tariff impact on major global automakers reached $11.7 billion by mid-2025. Toyota alone is forecasting a $9.5 billion tariff burden by the end of its fiscal year. Nobody is talking about what this means for the American workforce. Ford's Ohio assembly plant and Kentucky truck plant are running at full capacity building Super Duty trucks. That sounds like good news until you realize that the growth, the new capacity, the future investment is going to Canada. The 1-800 jobs at Oakville are 1-800 jobs that could have been created in Michigan or Ohio or Kentucky. The 100,000 additional trucks per year could have been American-made trucks. 10 U.S. plants in 5 states support Super Duty production, employing approximately 20,000 American workers. Those workers still have jobs today. But the trajectory is clear. When the next generation of Super Duty rolls out with multi-energy technology, the cutting-edge production will be in Canada. America gets the legacy lines. Canada gets the future. Sources inside the West Wing describe the mood as furious. The president reportedly learned about the scale of Ford's Canadian expansion from a Fox Business segment and demanded an immediate briefing from the Commerce Department. According to 2 sources familiar with internal deliberations, Trump's first instinct was to threaten Ford with punitive tariffs on any Canadian-built trucks imported back into the United States. But here is the brutal logic his own advisors cannot escape. The 25% auto tariff under Section 232 already applies to vehicles imported from Canada. Ford knows this. Ford has factored it in. The tariff on Canadian-built Super Duty trucks applies only to the non-U.S. content, which analysts estimate at roughly 50% of the vehicle's value. Ford calculated that even with partial tariff exposure, the combination of Canadian subsidies, cheaper energy, flexible trade agreements, and superior export access makes Oakville more profitable than building a new American plant from scratch. It gets worse. On February 5, 2026, Prime Minister Mark Carney launched a comprehensive new automotive strategy specifically designed to lure investment away from the United States. The strategy includes a $3 billion allocation from the Strategic Response Fund for major auto investments. It includes up to $100 million from the Regional Tariff Response Initiative to support small and medium suppliers. It includes reduced corporate tax rates for zero-emission technology manufacturers. It includes new import credit schemes that reward automakers for building vehicles in Canada. And here is the part that should terrify Washington. Carney is actively courting Chinese automakers to set up joint venture operations in Canada. During his January trip to Beijing, Carney agreed to lower tariffs on a limited quota of Chinese EVs from 100% to roughly 6%. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has already warned that Canada's deal with China could jeopardize USMCA negotiations. The Supreme Court's landmark IEEPA ruling on February 20, 2026, has made the situation exponentially more dangerous. In a 6-3 decision, Chief Justice Roberts wrote that the power to impose tariffs is a branch of the taxing power reserved for Congress under Article 1 of the Constitution. The court struck down the legal foundation for Trump's entire reciprocal tariff regime. The tax foundation estimates those IEEPA tariffs generated over $160 billion in revenue and would have raised $1.4 trillion over the next decade. They are gone. Trump responded within hours by imposing a 10% global surcharge under Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, which he immediately raised to the statutory maximum of 15%. But here is the critical detail that nobody in cable news is explaining. Section 122 tariffs expire automatically in 150 days by July 24, 2026, unless Congress votes to extend them. Congress will not extend them. The House already voted to repeal tariffs on Canadian goods with 6 Republicans breaking ranks. Trump's tariff authority is evaporating in real time, and Canada knows it. The Carney government is playing the clock. They do not need to outlast Trump's resolve. They need to outlast his legal authority. Meanwhile, every week that passes, another investment dollar flows north. Bloomberg reports that the Detroit Three now make just 23% of the cars assembled in Canada, down from 56% a decade ago. Honda and Toyota produced 77% of all vehicles built in Canada last year. The Canadian government has concluded that if Detroit is slowly abandoning Canadian factories anyway, there is no longer any reason to do American automakers favors. Canada is diversifying. Canada is signing strategic partnerships with South Korea, Japan, and China. Canada is building an auto industry that does not depend on American goodwill. And American tariff policy is funding the construction. Let us push the scenario to the extreme and talk about what this means for your wallet. The immediate impact hits the consumer. The Section 232 tariffs on autos remain in full force even after the IEEPA ruling. The Tax Foundation estimates these remaining tariffs will cost the average American household $400 in 2026. But that is the floor, not the ceiling. When Ford builds trucks in Canada and imports them back to the United States with a 25% tariff on non-US content, that cost gets passed to the buyer. Industry analysts project that sustained tariffs could add $5,000 to $9,000 to the price of a new vehicle, depending on where it was assembled and sourced. The National Association of Home Builders estimates that every $1,000 increase in the price of a new truck prices out thousands of small contractors and fleet operators who depend on Super Duty trucks for their livelihoods. Your plumber's bill goes up. Your electrician's estimate goes up. Your home renovation costs go up. The tariff does not stay at the border. It cascades through the entire economy. Here's the worst-case scenario that nobody in Washington wants to discuss. What happens when Ford is not the last? Toyota operates 11 U.S. factories running at full capacity, but many of its highest margin models, including the entire Lexus lineup and the Tacoma pickup, are built in Canada, Japan, and Mexico. Toyota's net income fell 25% in the first 9 months of its fiscal year, with tariffs costing roughly $8 billion. Toyota has told reporters the tariffs are highly disruptive and cannot be sustained. Hyundai has a $7.6 billion EV plant in Georgia that relies on a global parts supply chain, now strangled by tariffs. If Ford's Canadian expansion proves financially successful, which it will because the math is unambiguous, every other automaker will follow the same logic. Canada, with its trade agreements, its subsidized energy, its educated workforce, and its zero tariff access to 51 countries through CETA and CPTPP, becomes the new Detroit. Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, and Kentucky become museum pieces of what American manufacturing used to look like. Watch what happens to the supply chain. Ford's Oakville expansion does not exist in isolation. When an anchor manufacturer opens a plant, the supplier ecosystem follows. Stamping operations, wire harness manufacturers, seat foam suppliers, logistics companies, they all need to be within trucking distance of the assembly line. According to the Economic Policy Institute, every direct auto manufacturing job supports 7.4 additional jobs in the local economy. Those 1-800 jobs at Oakville will generate an estimated 13,000 supplier and service jobs across southern Ontario. Those are 13,000 jobs that will not exist in southern Ohio or western Michigan. The gravitational pull of manufacturing investment is relentless. Once the supplier base shifts, it becomes exponentially more expensive to reverse. You do not rebuild an auto supply chain with a tweet. History teaches us that trade wars never produce the outcomes their architects promise. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930 was supposed to protect American industry during the Depression. Instead, it triggered retaliatory tariffs from 25 nations, collapsed global trade by 66%, and deepened the economic catastrophe by years. Nixon's 10% import surcharge in 1971, imposed under the very same Trade Act authority Trump is now invoking, contributed to the stagflation of the 1970s. George W. Bush's steel tariffs in 2002 lasted 20 months before the WTO ruled them illegal, and analysts found they cost more American jobs than they saved. The pattern is consistent across a century of data. Tariffs protect the past at the expense of the future. They reward incumbents and punish innovators. They treat the economy like a fortress when it is actually an ecosystem. The founders understood this. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution gives Congress, not the President, the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and to lay and collect duties and imposts. The Supreme Court reaffirmed that principle on February 20th when Chief Justice Roberts wrote that the power to impose tariffs is very clearly a branch of the taxing power, and that EPA's two words, regulate and importation, cannot bear the weight of unilateral presidential tariff authority. Alexander Hamilton, the architect of American industrial policy, argued for targeted tariffs to protect infant industries, not blanket levies that punish established trading partners. Hamilton understood that trade is a web of mutual dependency and that severing those threads causes more damage than it prevents. What we are witnessing with Ford is Hamilton's nightmare brought to life, a tariff so blunt, so indiscriminate, that it does not protect American industry. It repels it. This is a stress test of the North American industrial architecture that has existed since the Auto Pact of 1965. Can the United States function as a manufacturing superpower when its own trade policy makes domestic production irrational? Can communities survive when anchor employers are driven away not by foreign competition, but by their own government's regulations? The answer, according to every supply chain analysis from the Department of Defense to the Congressional Research Service, is not in the short term, not without years of restructuring, tens of billions in alternative investment, and a fundamental rethinking of policies that were supposed to bring factories home, but are instead sending them across the border. We are in uncharted waters. The maps drawn by economists, the models built by trade theorists, none of them anticipated a scenario where the world's largest economy would voluntarily dismantle its own manufacturing base through protective tariffs. The irony is suffocating. Let us get technical about one final mechanism, because this is the part that should concern every portfolio manager reading auto sector exposure. The cross-border parts flow in the North American auto industry involves roughly $100 billion in annual trade between the United States and Canada. When tariffs disrupt that flow, they do not just raise costs, they create uncertainty. And uncertainty is the silent killer of capital investment. According to the Center for Automotive Research, a 25% sustained tariff on Canadian imports will redirect an estimated $35 billion in automotive investment from the United States to Canada over the next 5 years. That is not speculation. That is the trajectory confirmed by every major automaker's capital allocation decisions in the past 12 months. Ford is expanding in Canada. Honda is expanding in Canada. Toyota is holding its Canadian operations while running U.S. plants at max capacity with nowhere to grow. The capital is voting with its feet. The human cost of this realignment is being written right now in break rooms and union halls across the industrial Midwest. We spoke to auto industry workers in Ohio who asked to remain anonymous. They voted for the tariffs because they believed the tariffs would protect their jobs. Now they watch Canadian plants receive billion-dollar investments while their own facilities run legacy product lines approaching end of life. The confusion is palpable. The grief is real. And it is not just the workers on the line. It is the diner owner who serves the second shift lunch crowd. It is the daycare center that depends on auto worker families. It is the tax base that funds the schools and the fire department. When manufacturing investment leaves a region, it does not leave quietly. It hollows out communities from the inside, one paycheck at a time. Here is the connection that ties this entire catastrophe together. The Supreme Court ruled that Congress holds the taxing power. Congress has shown no appetite for extending Trump's replacement tariffs. The USMCA is up for renegotiation in 2026, with no clear path to resolution. Canada is aggressively diversifying its trade relationships with Asia and Europe. The auto industry is hemorrhaging billions in tariff costs and responding by moving investment to wherever the math works. Every one of these threads leads to the same conclusion. The tariff strategy has not just failed to bring manufacturing home, it has created the financial incentive structure for American manufacturing to leave. The weapon the president built is being used against him. What does Xi Jinping think when he watches this unfold? What does every adversary calculate? They see the most powerful manufacturing economy in history engaged in a trade war with its closest ally that is actively driving American industry across the border. China has been aggressively courting automakers for partnerships. If America pushes companies out and Canada's capacity fills up, China becomes the overflow destination. The tariffs that were supposed to contain Chinese manufacturing dominance are inadvertently creating the vacuum that China will fill. Canada signed a preliminary agreement with Beijing in January 2026 that includes joint venture investment in the auto sector. The strategic implications are staggering. The alliance that was supposed to counter Chinese industrial power is fracturing from within. So here is what to watch. Watch the USMCA renegotiation deadline this July. If the United States, Canada, and Mexico cannot reach a new trade agreement, the tariff chaos becomes permanent and the exodus accelerates. Watch Toyota's announcement on North American production strategy expected within weeks. If they follow Ford's logic north, the avalanche becomes unstoppable. Watch the commodity and auto equity markets. Ford stock hit a 52-week high when the Oakville expansion was first announced. The market is telling you that Wall Street sees Canada as the rational play. Watch the Section 122 surcharge. It expires in 150 days. If Congress does not extend it, and they will not, Trump loses his last remaining tariff tool on imported goods. And watch the midterms. The 2026 elections are 9 months away. Multiple House seats in the industrial corridor are competitive. Republicans cannot run on tariffs as a success story when the biggest names in American manufacturing are building their future in Ontario. The political fallout is already seismic. Ontario Premier Doug Ford warned that up to 500,000 Ontario jobs could be at risk from broader tariff escalation, but in the same breath acknowledged the walls are closing in on President Trump after 6 Republicans crossed the floor in Congress and the Supreme Court struck down his tariff authority. Canada's industry minister has threatened to go after GM and Stellantis for money, accusing them of breaking promises they made when they accepted government funding. The battle lines are drawn, and American workers are caught in the crossfire. For one man sitting in the White House, this was supposed to be simple. Tariffs meant leverage. Leverage meant deals. Deals meant winning. But the formula broke because it assumed American companies would always choose American soil, no matter the cost. That assumption is dead. Ford Motor Company, the company Henry Ford built with his own hands in Michigan, the company that employs more hourly manufacturing workers in the United States than any other automaker, has looked at the spreadsheet and concluded that Canada is the better bet. The tariff wall was supposed to keep jobs in. Instead, it is locking them out. The assembly lines that built the American middle class are being redirected across the 49th parallel. And the ink on the blueprints is already dry. Subscribe. Stay informed. The industrial map of North America is being redrawn in real time, and the architects of this catastrophe have no idea how to stop it.